Over the last weeks, I've extensively tested the new Fitbit Sense 2 for its sports and health tracking performance. And in this video, we will take a comprehensive look at the heart rate accuracy, sleep tracking performance, GPS tracking, and step counting accuracy of this brand new watch from Fitbit. Now, as always, my videos are not about listing the specs for you, but instead I will focus on independent and unbiased performance testing of this top-of-the-line watch from Fitbit. Hello everyone! For those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Now, like I said, I do not want to list the specs for you, but before getting to the test results, I do want to make a few short remarks. First of all, Fitbit is now owned by Google, so in many ways this is now also a Google product, and in a way competing directly with the Google Pixel Watch. However, I personally do not feel that anything major has changed in the way that the Fitbit app or devices like the Sense 2 operate since Google bought Fitbit. Second, Fitbit has had a subscription service for a while now, where you only get certain statistics after you pay for the subscription. Now, I'm not a fan of this model, though it does seem to be where a lot of companies are heading. However, basically everything I will be discussing in this video is available in the free version of the app. Now, without further ado, let's get to the test results. And I want to start off with the heart rate tracking accuracy, since this is probably one of the most important features for most people buying a health tracker. I actually tested this during a total of 48 workout sessions. To test that, I'll compare the heart rate measurements of the Fitbit Sense 2 against the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. We'll start by looking at one of the easiest types of exercises for a watch to track, cycling indoors. And I'll be looking at a total of 9 interval spinning sessions. Now this involves very little movement or tension on my arms and will therefore produce less noise. And here we can see an overview of that accuracy over several rides. Each dot here is a single heart rate measurement, with along the horizontal axis the value according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and on the vertical axis the value according to the Sense 2. The closer the points are to the blue line, the better the agreement, and the darker black the color, the more dots that there are. As you can see, there's an okay agreement between the Sense 2 and the ECG chest strap. Many points are indeed close to the blue line, but there are also quite a few points away from the blue line. Especially in the higher heart rate range, we see quite some points tend to be shifted down, meaning that the watch detected a too low heart rate. The correlation, this R value up here, is also okay but not amazing, at a value of 0.87. This correlation value cannot be higher than 1, so a value of 0.87 is okay, but there's definitely many better watches out there. We can see why that is if we actually look at the individual training sessions. And here you can see my first interval spinning session, for instance. Along the horizontal axis we have the time and my heart rate is along the vertical axis. In blue-green I plotted my heart rate according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and in red is my heart rate according to the Sense 2. As you can see, the two lines overlap somewhat, though the Sense 2 clearly often detects a way too low heart rate. Especially here near the end of the training, it wasn't really able to pick up on the peaks in my heart rate. But we generally see something like this for the entire training session. And that is basically what we see for all training sessions. The Fitbit Sense 2 tends to detect quite low heart rates at times, as you can see especially here in the beginning, but it's true also here, and generally it's always a bit lower than it should be when my heart rate is high. And again, we see this same thing in this third example training session right here. The overlap is not that great since the Sense 2 often fails to detect the peaks in my heart rate. However, let's put this into perspective by comparing it to 65 other watches I've tested over the last 2 years. That overview is displayed right here. Now the correlation value I was talking about before is the metric I'll use for this, and that is displayed along the horizontal axis. We want that value to be as close to 1 as possible. Now on the vertical axis I ordered the watches from worst to best, so the further to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. Now here I marked the Sense 2 in red, and as you can see the Sense 2 is amongst the medium to low performing watches. It's not terrible, but I would say it's in the lower middle class. However, it is a bit difficult to see because of the sheer number of devices, so let's zoom in a bit. Now that way we get rid of the worst performing watches and we can see everything a bit more clearly. Now here I only display the watches with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. As you can see, the Sense 2 is close in performance to the Fitbit Inspire 2, Charge 4 and the previous generation, the Fitbit Sense 1. Also, many Garmin watches have similar performance as well. As regular viewers of my channel will know, the best watches are different Apple watches and also some selected Huawei watches. Overall, this means that the Fitbit Sense 2 is doing okay when it comes to heart rate tracking for cycling indoors, though it definitely has significant issues when detecting my peak heart rate. Next, let's briefly take a look at another easy type of exercise for a watch to track, walking outside. And here are the results of the first walk. Again, in blue-green are the measurements of the chest strap and in red the Sense 2. Now we see quite some deviations from the ECG chest strap, especially here in the beginning. Again, the watch tends to detect a too low heart rate and it fails to detect many of the peaks in my heart rate. And we see something similar in this second walk. Again, we see that the watch often fails to detect all the peaks in my heart rate, as you can see for instance here, but also right here, here and right here. But in some cases it even detects a too high heart rate, as you can see right here, but also right here and right here. Generally, these are the moments when I took a short break. Next, let's take a look at a more challenging type of exercise, cycling outside. Now, while cycling outdoors, watches tend to shift a lot more on the wrist as well, making accurate heart rate readings much more difficult. To see how this affected the Sense 2, I tested it during a total of 27 bike rides. Here we can see a similar overview plot to before, but now for biking outside. As you can see, there's an even worse agreement with the ECG chest strap compared to what we saw before for cycling indoors. There are many points below the blue line now, indicating that in these moments the Sense 2 detected a too low heart rate. The correlation is also very low, with a value of 0.51. And we can see that in more detail if you look at some of the bike rides themselves. As you can see, the red line representing the Sense 2 is almost always lower than the heart rate detected by the chest strap in blue. It somehow never seems to be able to detect my higher heart rates. And this is what we see for many bike rides, like this one right here, where we also see that the Sense 2 detected quite low heart rates much of the time. However, somehow it also fails to detect my lowest heart rates, as you can see right here for instance, but also right here and right here. So it generally seems to struggle with big changes in heart rate. And I would say this is what most rides look like, which is quite bad, showing mostly too low heart rate, but also sometimes too high heart rates. Honestly, out of all 27 rides, I couldn't find any that showed a good overlap with the ECG chest strap, so there's honestly no way that I would recommend this watch for use with cycling outside. We can again put this into perspective by looking at many of the other watches I've tested over the last years. And similar to before, we will use the correlation with the ECG chest strap as the value on the horizontal axis, and the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. Now, as you can see, the Fitbit Sense 2, which I marked here in red, is really amongst the worst watches when it comes to heart rate tracking for cycling outside. If you want good heart rate tracking for this exercise, I would again recommend an Apple Watch for iOS and some selected Huawei watches for Android. Some Garmin watches are also actually quite okay for this purpose. So this is honestly not looking that great. And so far, these exercises represent easy and medium hard exercises for a watch to track your heart rate. So let's now move on to one of the most difficult exercises for a watch to track, weightlifting. As I've mentioned previously, this is much more difficult because of the increased tension on my wrist and on my arm, making it much harder for the watch to get a clean heart rate signal. However, first a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, I'm planning to start back up with my newsletter and posting more off-the-cuff things on my Instagram and my YouTube Shorts channel. So if you're interested in any of those are linked below. Of course, you would also make me really happy and it would help my efforts if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. But of course, this is totally up to you. Now, enough self-promotion. Let's take a look at the performance during weightlifting, which I tested during a total of 7 training sessions. Here we can see an overview of that accuracy similar to before. The performance of the Fitbit Sense 2 again doesn't appear to be very good. We see that especially when my heart rate is higher, that all the points seem to be below the blue line. But even in the medium heart rate ranges, we see the agreement is not that good. The correlation is also not very high, now with a value of 0.67. If we look at the individual training sessions, we can indeed see that the Sense 2 is not performing very well. Each time I do a set of exercises, my heart rate increases, as you can see clearly from the blue line of the ECG chest strap. The Sense 2 in red is generally not able to follow along with these peaks, and it generally keeps detecting a way too low heart rate. And this is basically what we see for all training sessions. The Sense 2 keeps detecting my baseline heart rate and fails to pick up on any peaks in my heart rate. Now let's again put this into perspective by comparing it to many of the other watches I've tested in the past. And we can see those results in this overview right here. Again, the more to the top right, the better the consistency with the ECG chest strap. As you can see, relative to other watches at least, the Sense 2 marked in red is not doing that great. It's roughly in the middle of all the watches that I've ever tested. When we now zoom in a bit, we can see it's similar in performance to some other Fitbit watches like the Charge 4, Charge 5 and Inspire 2. And it's also similar in performance to many Garmin watches. Overall, I would say that the Sense 2 is not that useful for tracking your heart rate while weightlifting. So based on my initial testing, I would conclude that the Fitbit Sense 2 isn't a very good heart rate tracker. It does okay when I'm spinning, though it still tends to detect a too low heart rate. However, when cycling outside or weightlifting, it really doesn't do well at all. Therefore, overall, I'd give the heart rate tracking of the Sense 2 2 out of 5 stars. Now, my go-to devices for tracking heart rate are Apple Watches, and for Android, some Huawei watches are also quite good. So if you're in the market for a wrist-based heart rate tracker, I would choose any of these devices. But let's now move on to something Fitbit has traditionally been very good at, sleep stage tracking. I showed you in a recent video that the Google Pixel Watch is likely using Fitbit's algorithm for sleep stage tracking, and that for Android this is still one of the best ways of tracking your sleep. To check if the Fitbit Sense can detect my sleep stages, I'll compare it to an EEG device called the Dream 2 that can actually measure my brain waves and has been shown to be relatively reliable at sleep stage tracking. Now here I show an overview of the sleep test results. For getting an overall impression of how well the Sense 2 performs, the Dream 2 should likely be good enough. However, the gold standard would be polysomnography, which I'd also like to try on the Sense 2 in the future. Now on top here are the sleep stages as recorded by the EEG device, and on the left the sleep stages as recorded by the Sense 2. I wore both the EEG device and the Sense 2 to bed for 60 nights, and I will see how close the predictions of the Sense 2 are to those of the EEG device. Now each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the Dream 2 was predicted as each sleep stage by the Sense 2. If they perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal should be 100%. First of all, we see that about 77% of what was deep sleep according to the EEG device was also predicted as deep sleep by the Sense 2, which is pretty good. When deep sleep according to the EEG device was predicted differently by the Sense 2, it was predicted as light sleep at about 23%. And we can see that based on the individual nights. On top we have the sleep stages according to the Dream 2 EEG headband, with the clock time along the horizontal axis and the sleep stages on the vertical axis. On the bottom we have a similar plot, but now for the Fitbit Sense 2. I've highlighted all the EEG recorded deep sleep in purple right here. Now for this night we can indeed see that the deep sleep detected by the EEG headband and the deep sleep detected by the Sense 2 show pretty good agreement. However, the Sense 2 does tend to detect more deep sleep than the EEG device, as you can see right here but also right here. This second example night also shows some good results, with a pretty good match between both devices when it comes to deep sleep. The Sense 2 did again detect some extra deep sleep, as you can see right here, here and here, but overall the agreement is pretty good. And this is basically what we see for all nights, like this one right here. Most of the deep sleep according to the EEG device is also detected by the Sense 2, but often some extra deep sleep is detected as well. Light sleep agreement was also pretty good at 74%, which again confirms that different models of Fitbit all appear to be pretty consistent at sleep stage tracking, since this looks similar to what we've seen for other Fitbits. And if the Sense 2 did disagree with the EEG device on light sleep, it mostly predicted deep sleep, though sometimes also some of the other sleep stages. Now REM sleep agreement was also quite okay, at about 56% agreement with the EEG device. If it was predicted differently, it was mostly predicted as being light sleep at about 37%. And we can see that clearly based on the individual nights as well. Now this is a similar plot to before, but now with the REM sleep as measured by the EEG device marked in red. Again, we see a pretty good agreement. The general REM sleep segments are similar between the EEG device and the Sense 2, though the Sense 2 tended to detect some awake moments in these segments as well, as you can see for instance right here, but also right here. And I would say the second example night looks similar. There's generally a pretty good overlap, though at the end of the night the Sense 2 detected me as being fully awake, whereas the EEG device detected me as going in and out of sleep. And this third night also shows quite a good agreement, with similar REM sleep segments detected by both devices. Now this actually means we can also see the sleep cycles based on just the data from the Sense 2, at least for this night. Now you go through roughly 4 to 6 sleep cycles each night, each one starting with light and deep sleep marked here in blue, and each one ending in REM sleep marked here in red. As you can see, I likely had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 complete sleep cycles this night. And we are able to see this based on just the data from the Sense 2, which is actually something that most devices struggle with, so this is really good. Awake detection also agreed very well, at about 73% agreement. And any disagreement was mostly with light sleep, but surprisingly also sometimes with deep sleep. However, this deep sleep issue was mostly due to one single night, where I'd taken off the watch a bit before bed, and the watch had already started detecting some deep sleep at that time. Now, when I did put back on the watch, it detected me as being awake again for a while before I actually fell asleep. But this first part of deep sleep was falsely detected, so it seems it could not discriminate between the watch being on or off my wrist for that part of the night. In general, I would say that the Fitbit Sense 2 does tend to detect the longer awake moments that the EEG device also detected, as you can see right here for instance, but it generally tends to miss some of the shorter awake moments that the EEG device detected, like this one right here for instance, and also this one right here, but also sometimes detects some extra awake moments, like this one right here. And we see the same thing for this second example night, where the EEG device detected some awake moments, which the Fitbit Sense 2 also detected, but both devices also detected some awake moments that the other did not detect, with the Sense 2 especially detecting some additional awake moments, as you can see for instance right here, but also right here and right here. To put these results into context, we can compare the performance of the Fitbit Sense 2 to that of 42 other watches I've tested in the past. Now this graph shows an overview of the agreement of different watches with the EEG device. Along the horizontal axis we have the average agreement over the 4 individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. Now the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. And as you can see, the devices with the best agreement so far were different Apple Watches. In this case, the Apple Watch SE 2022, the Apple Watch 8, the Apple Watch Ultra and the Apple Watch 7. Now the other good devices do include different Fitbits like the Fitbit Charge 5, Inspire 2 and Sense, but also the Pixel Watch, Withings Sleep Analyzer and Whoop straps. Though I have to say all of these are not quite as good as the Apple Watches. If we now plot the Fitbit Sense 2 in the same plot, which is marked here in red, we see that it's very similar in performance to all the other Fitbit devices I tested in the past. In this case, the Charge 5, Inspire 2 and Sense 1 all perform very similar to the Sense 2. Now the Google Pixel Watch actually also runs Fitbit software and therefore performs very similar. Now based on these results, I would conclude that the Sense 2 is still running the same software as all Fitbit devices have done in the past, which means it's performing pretty good at sleep stage tracking. So overall, the sleep stage tracking of the Fitbit Sense 2 seems to be quite good, and I suspect it does about as well as any other Fitbit device. Therefore, overall, I give the sleep stage tracking of the Fitbit Sense 2 4 out of 5 stars. Now, before Apple Watches released with their new sleep stage tracking, this score would have been higher, but the Apple Watches really upped the game with their new software. The main benefit of the Sense 2 over the Apple Watch is that the Sense 2 can track your naps, whereas Apple Watches cannot do this. But let's now move on to another important feature of the Sense 2, the location or GPS tracking. To test that, I tracked my route during 10 bike rides while I was cycling to and from work. And I want to test 2 things. 1, how long does it take for the watch to get a GPS signal? And 2, how well the GPS signals overlap when cycling the same route several times. Now those results are displayed here for 5 times I cycled to work. I started the activity the moment I was ready to leave, and I did not provide the watch with any extra time to acquire the signal. The green markers indicates those moments that the GPS signal was connected. And as you can see, 3 times it connected the signal relatively fast, though definitely not instantly, and also the accuracy was not very good. The 3 markers are still relatively spread out. Additionally, the other 2 times it took quite a bit more time for it to acquire the signal. Now it also seems as though once it first has the signal, it needs some time to get a more accurate signal. And you can see that especially strongly here for the last signal it acquired. In the beginning it's really all over the place until it settles in with the rest of the signals. And once it has this signal, the consistency is okay, though definitely not great. As you can see right here, for instance, I would say there's still quite some spread in the signals. Now for cycling back from work, we see that the signals were acquired a bit more quickly, though again, definitely not instantly. And if we look at the quality and consistency of the signals, this is again okay, though definitely not great. And here, for instance, we see a big spread in the signals. And especially right here, the signals are super spread out and the quality is quite bad. And that is also what we see right here at the end of the ride. The signals are still quite spread out and not very consistent, with some significant deviations from the road as well. Overall, I'm honestly not super happy with the GPS tracking performance of the Fitbit Sense 2. It sometimes takes quite a while for it to lock onto my signal, and there's quite some deviation between the signals when I cycle the same route several times. Therefore, overall, I'd give the GPS tracking 2.5 out of 5 stars. Now, I still have to quantify it, but the quality is not that great, and devices from, for instance, Garmin perform a lot better. Now, the next thing I tested on the Fitbit Sense 2 is the step counting accuracy. To test the step counting accuracy, I went out and I took exactly 8,000 steps with the Fitbit Sense 2. Now, I do not like counting 8,000 steps in my head, which is why I counted each step manually using this tally counter. Let's take a look at those results. Now, here are the results for the first 4,000 steps, where I wore the Fitbit Sense 2 on my right arm. Along the horizontal axis, we have the time, and the total number of steps counted is along the vertical axis. Now, this red line right here represents the steps counted by the Sense 2, and the blue vertical lines indicates those moments it should have counted 1,000 steps more. So the first blue line indicates where it should have counted 1,000 steps, the second 2,000, 3,000, and so on. Now, overall, I would say that the Sense 2 was pretty consistent and it generally counted very close to the correct number of steps, though it did tend to count a few more steps than it was supposed to. And we can actually see that for each segment, the number of steps added is a little bit more than 1,000. And especially during the second and the third segment, it counted some extra steps. This means that here in the end, it counted just over 100 steps too many. Now, I actually wore the new Fitbit Versa 4 at the same time, but on the other wrist, which is displayed here in the same plot, but now in blue-green. We can actually see that both watches perform more or less similarly. Now, both are pretty good, though the Versa 4 actually counted the steps slightly more accurately, ending up closer to the 4,000 steps it should have counted. Now, I actually repeated this experiment and those results are displayed here. As you can see, the watch was again pretty close to the actual number of steps it should have counted, though I have to say that the Sense 2 overcounted by quite a few more steps this time. Especially here during this second segment, it counted far too many steps. Where it should have counted 1,000 steps, it counted a total of 1,105 steps. This means that over the full 4,000 steps, it overcounted by more than 200 steps. Again, if we display the Versa 4 in blue-green, we see that it performed more or less similarly again to the Sense 2, though it might have just counted a few less steps. Overall though, both watches seem to perform similarly. So the step counting is looking quite okay so far, though the Sense 2 does sometimes overcount my steps. However, the next question is if the Sense 2 ever counts steps when it's not supposed to, for instance when doing activities that do not involve walking. Now, those results are displayed here for 4 activities on the vertical axis: walking, cycling, spinning, and strength training. Along the horizontal axis, we have the number of steps per minute that the Sense 2 counted for each of these activities. Now, ideally, it would count close to 0 steps during all of the activities that do not involve any type of walking or running. Now, as you can see, when I was walking, as is displayed here in purple, 4 times it counted about 80 to 90 steps per minute, which is a normal walking pace. There are also these 4 measurements right here where I detected fewer steps. I suspect that these are automatically detected moments of walking where I also stood still in between. Now, interestingly, when cycling outside, it actually counted quite a few steps as well, as you can see here in red. Sometimes it counted close to 50 steps per minute, which is quite a lot for cycling. And on average, it counted about 30 steps per minute. So in other words, a step every 2 seconds. I think this is quite an overcounting of my number of steps. Interestingly though, while spinning, it also counted quite a few steps, as you can see in green, and it's not that different an amount compared to cycling outside. In this case, it counted about 20 steps per minute, but this still means it counted about 1 step every 3 seconds while I was on my spinning bike. And though while weightlifting it also counted some steps, these were not that many, and these numbers are actually more in the realistic range of what I would expect for this type of exercise, because I am moving about the apartment a bit. I would say that overall, the step counting performance of the Fitbit Sense 2 is okay when I'm actually walking, though it does tend to count a few too many steps when you're not walking. Therefore, overall, I'd give the step counting accuracy 3 out of 5 stars. Now, I should note that I didn't test all functionalities of the Sense 2 yet. I didn't test the temperature sensor, electrodermal activity or EDA sensor, and ECG sensor yet, mostly because these are very difficult to actually test at the moment. In terms of usefulness, these are also probably some of the least important features. Now, the temperature trends could be useful for women who want to track their cycle and for anybody who wants to check for an elevated body temperature throughout the night. I personally think that the EDA sensor is more or less a gimmick still and not that useful for most people. The ECG sensor can be useful, but you don't have to check this every day. Overall, I do think I was able to test the most important features for most people on the Fitbit Sense 2, and I honestly think it didn't perform all that great. The only thing I can really recommend it for is the sleep stage tracking. However, for all the other features, I would say it was mediocre at best. Therefore, overall, I'd give the Fitbit Sense 2 3 out of 5 stars. The Sense 2 performed quite poorly on me when it comes to heart rate tracking, and there are many cheaper devices out there that perform even better. Now, the sleep tracking is pretty good and as good as we've come to expect from Fitbit, so this will be one of the reasons for me to get the Sense 2. Though other cheaper Fitbits will perform just as well, since even my old Fitbit Charge 2 seems to have about the same performance. I'm also testing the new and much cheaper Fitbit Inspire 3, and that video should come out soon as well. Now, if you do want to buy a Fitbit, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, and at the same time support this channel, there are different affiliate links in the description below that do not cost you any extra, and some even provide a discount. If you want to know more about the performance of the new Google Pixel Watch, check out this video right here. Or if you want to know more about the best watches on iOS, the Apple Watches, check out my complete reviews on these watches right here. Now, I hope that this video provided you with some value. Thank you so much for watching and catch you in the next video.